Hello and welcome to the Airfix YouTube channel. In this video we're going to be taking a look at the 1/72 scale Supermarine Spitfire Mk1a starter set. Airfix starter sets offer the beginner the perfect opportunity to get into the hobby of scale modelling, and each starter set contains all of the paints, glue and brushes required to build a replica of your favourite aircraft. We're going to be building and painting the kit on the Humbrol workstation, which houses a cutting mat and is designed to hold all of our tools. If you're going to be trying out a starter set at home, it's important to remember that modelling can be a messy hobby, so ensure that you put some newspaper or similar protection down on your work surface to prevent any damage. On removing the contents from the box, you'll find the kit parts mounted on plastic frames which are commonly referred to as sprues. Each sprue should be inspected to make sure that none of the parts have broken off in the box and that you have everything you need to continue. But before we actually do any modelling, we're going to give the sprues a good wash in warm soapy water. This removes any residue left over from the manufacturing process, as this can prevent the paint from sticking to the surface of the kit later on. Once everything's been scrubbed thoroughly, it's rinsed in clean water and then left to air dry. The instruction booklet will refer to each part of the model by a letter and then a number. The letter refers to the sprue which houses the component, and the number allows you to identify the individual parts. We're going to begin removing the parts required for the cockpit now by gently rocking them backwards and forwards on the sprue until they break away. Any excess plastic is simply scratched off with a fingernail. If you have a nail file to hand, try using this to remove the plastic. Extra care is taken with the smaller parts, as these are very fragile and we don't want to break them. With all of the components removed from the sprue, it's now time to build the cockpit using the Humbrol polycement. Polycement doesn't work like ordinary glue, instead it melts the plastic of the model kit, so if we start trying to apply it directly from the tube, it could run everywhere and ruin our kit. Instead, what we're going to do is create a small palette and applicator from a piece of the cardboard packaging that the starter set was supplied in. A small section of cardboard is ripped up to form a palette which will hold the glue for us, and then another piece of card is formed into a pointed applicator which we can use to apply the polycement to the plastic parts, keeping everything neat and under control. Adding too much glue to the joint between two parts means it will take too long to dry, and there's a risk that you may get fingerprints or excess glue spilling out onto your kit, ruining the overall finish. The 4 small spots of polycement that we've just applied are more than enough to secure the pilot seat almost instantly, and we can simply set that aside and allow it to cure fully. Now we can simply assemble the rest of the parts in the same fashion, following the instructions at each step. While the polycement is curing on the cockpit section, we can move ahead and paint the inside of the fuselage with the paint colour called out on the instructions. Acrylic paint will separate quite badly while it's in transit or sat on the shelf, so a good stir may be needed to return the paint to its former glory. Here we're using the back end of the supplied paintbrush, and it's slowly returning back to the colour it's supposed to be. Now it's time to start adding some life to this Spitfire by applying the first coat of paint. We're using the paint straight from the pot with the supplied brush, and we're just making sure that we don't apply too much in one go and obscure any of the detail. It's also important to remember that we don't want to leave any areas unpainted, as these will stand out quite badly. The first coat of paint can look quite patchy, so if yours looks similar to this, don't be disheartened, as this is just the base coat for future layers. To achieve a much smoother finish, you may want to try thinning your paint with some ordinary tap water. We're going to use a small piece of acetate as our palette, however you could use the plastic from the front of the starter kit which used to hold the paints in place. By adding just a few drops of tap water to the paint, we've now greatly enhanced its flow and covering ability. Any layers of paint that we apply now will dry much more evenly and help to build up a much better finish on the surface of the model. The reason we didn't thin the first coat of paint is because the water in the mixture would have prevented it from sticking to the surface of the plastic kit. That base layer of pure paint that we applied earlier has essentially worked as a primer coat. After a couple of applications of the paint thinned with tap water, we've now built up a nice solid coating of paint on the inside of the fuselage. The bare plastic was primed using paint straight from the pot, and then paint thinned with water was used to build up the colour into a more solid, even coverage. We can now go back and paint the cockpit, as the polycement is sure to have cured by now. As there are no large surface areas to cover, we don't need to thin the paint with any water, we can simply block in the colours straight from the pot. If you're feeling confident, you could also apply the transfer for the instrument panel. We're going to cover transfers later in the video, so we'll skip this step for now. We can now roll out the two techniques of gluing and painting that we covered in the first half of the video to complete the rest of this Airfix Spitfire. It's worth pointing out that when joining the two fuselage halves together, it's better to hold this joint until it dries completely to avoid leaving any gaps. To help you with this process, try using clothes pegs or rubber bands to hold the fuselage. Also be sure to paint the interior of any parts which will be visible from the outside of the kit. Because this is a starter set, everything should come together very quickly and we'll soon have something that resembles a Spitfire. Before we glue on any of the detail parts or the canopy, we're going to paint the model using the same technique we demonstrated earlier. Once again, we've thinned the paint with tap water to ensure that we get better coverage. It may take a few coats to build up the colour, so don't be disheartened if your initial paintwork looks a bit patchy. Here you can see that after 2 coats it's already starting to look much more bold. This process can then be repeated, making sure that the paint dries fully between applications. The end result will be a very nice smooth application of the base colour. We can then repeat this process with the lighter colour paint on the underside of the aircraft. The upper portion of the Spitfire is completed with the application of the iconic green camouflage scheme. You can either follow the instructions off the box for an exact replica, or you can have some fun and make up your own camouflage pattern. All we need to do now is join the two colours together with a nice neat line. A steady hand is required, but use the edges of the panel lines as a guide. One of the wings on the underside of the Spitfire is meant to be camouflaged with black paint, so we're going to neatly paint the edge of this area and then block the colour in with the same technique that we used to paint the rest of the plane. The leading edge of the wings can then be touched up with the edge of the brush, before the detail parts are assembled, and we can finish off the build of this Spitfire and apply the markings. These markings are provided on a printed sheet which is commonly referred to as decals, decals or transfers. To remove an individual decal from the backing paper, it needs to be soaked in water for a couple of seconds and then left to sit until the glue on the backing paper becomes moist enough to move the decal into position. After a couple of minutes you'll notice it can be manipulated with a brush. By wetting the surface of the model first, you ensure that you can move the transfer around and get it into position. When you're happy with the position of the marking, carefully blot it dry with some tissue paper. This process is simply repeated for all of the other markings on the Spitfire until it's fully decorated in RAF livery. We've almost finished the model now, but we can't rush this step as it's important that we get a nice neat edge around the frame of the canopy. Use the edge of the brush to pick up the raised edges and you'll soon have a nice neat paint job around the edge of the clear parts. With a couple of small drops of glue on the inside of the cockpit, we can then push the canopy into place and the overall construction is complete. Don't forget to attach the very delicate parts right at the end or they may become broken while you complete the rest of the model. And here we have our completed Supermarine Spitfire Mk1a starter set from Airfix. Using only the tools and paints within the box, we've created a replica of one of the most iconic fighter aircraft of all time. We hope you've enjoyed this video from Airfix and we hope that you'll check back to the YouTube channel for more updates in future. Thanks very much for watching and we'll see you again next time.